What's up, Internet? A lot has happened to me over the past couple of months that I want to share with you, positive things mind you, but for now I want to take a time to celebrate the best pieces of art and entertainment I've experienced this year. Luckily, there's been a lot, hence the length of the video. While a few selections on my list, well, technically this isn't a list, but anyways, while a few of my selections are nostalgia-based, I'm happy to say up front that most of the entertainment I've consumed this year has been new and original content that is not directly based on a pre-existing property, at least not in the form of a direct sequel, remake, spin-off, or reboot. Though, as I've stated before frequently on my channel, I do firmly believe that one can be both an advocate for both new and original content while also accepting some indulgence in nostalgia here and there. It's all a matter of balance. Now, before you go about pointing to me, well, what about this one? Why haven't you seen this one yet? Keep in mind that, as I mentioned, I've had a lot going in my life lately, and I don't have time to get to each and every recommendation from everyone else. And even disregarding all that, it is virtually impossible for me to give attention to every single product that deserves it, and even harder to absorb all of it and properly form a solid impression of it. There are even some recent releases like the new movie Dune or the upcoming Spider-Man No Way Home that I still have yet to see but would like to. I just want to bring up the stuff that stood out to me most personally. All of these are selections that I clearly have no problem recommending to others, but really, I just want to be able to take a moment to bring them up and hear out what your own thoughts on each of them is, if you have already seen them. So don't feel too bummed out if I don't mention your personal favorite thing to come out of 2021. Feel free to share with me in the comments about what your selections are, and maybe I'll get around to seeing them for myself on my own time. But for right now, this is me sharing what I personally have seen and what has left the greatest impression on me afterwards. Since there are too many options for me to be able to properly organize onto a list, I'll just go off the selections one by one and how each of them stood out to me. So without further ado, enjoy. After last year, when a lot of theater lovers were panicking over the idea of theaters going completely out of business, myself included to a degree, it's been really pleasant for most of us to find that most of them are still active and people are still going them to experience some astounding releases, especially if they're in families. And thankful that while the theater business did take a huge blow from the global shutdown, it's still finding ways to survive. One very special theater-going experience for me personally this year was one where my local theater was hosting a screening of Ghost in the Shell, the original one, aka the one that actually warrants watching, and conveniently enough, this would be my very first time seeing it. And since it is one that is regarded as a must-see by many animation enthusiasts, I can now say that I saw it, and I even got this free poster to go along with it. My impressions on the movie? Well, the scope and scale of it alone was worth seeing on the big screen. But as far as the story and characters, I am admittedly one who connects to fictional characters on an emotional level, and I feel that the characters in Ghost in the Shell are ones whom we are expected to care about on a more philosophical level. And on that level, it certainly succeeds and provokes the appropriate amount of reaction from the audience. And for more on that, I would recommend watching Max Darrett's video on the movie. It's just not my kind of movie, personally. I still admire and highly respect it, and the best thing I can say about the animation is one particular scene that proves to me that anime is probably the only traditional 2D medium I've seen thus far that manages to capture and successfully emulate the uncanny valley effect of animatronics resembling humans, which we've become familiar with in live-action, 3D, and real-world images. The style of animation in Ghost of the Shell manages to not obscure that facet, and the result is very impressively eerie. My aunt got me the Disney Plus bundle as an early Christmas present this year, and I admit that I was rather hesitant about it at first. I know that lots of other people, including Disney devotees like myself, were getting a kick out of Disney Plus. But for me, personally, most Disney-related content I consume is stuff that sooner or later would become available to purchase on DVD or iTunes. Such was the case with both Soul and Luca. So I didn't want my aunt to buy me a Disney Plus subscription when I wasn't even sure I was going to be using it that much. Plus, even as an avid Disney fan myself, there is an extent to which I would support and consume their products, and I wasn't sure if my devotee side would be invested enough or if the bulk majority of it would just feel too corporate-driven for my tastes. But with influence from both my aunt and my sister, I let her buy me the Disney Plus bundle, and I must say that I've been using it more than I was expecting to. Not that I'm complaining about it. Sometimes to check out Disney Plus original content that blew me away in a lot of ways, as well as finally getting to see the first few episodes of The Mandalorian and finally being able to see what all the Baby Yoda fuss was about. And other times it was to watch some of my favorite classics that have not been made available on other platforms, like Fantasia. This year was a year much like any other for products to come out of Disney. Some were hard hits, some hard misses, and certainly not without controversies in between. I already mentioned finally getting to see Soul and Luca when they eventually became available for purchase on iTunes, and I found both to be excellent. And I mentioned earlier this year that I got to see Raya on the big screen for less than the initial $30 purchase on Disney+, and I did most recently see Encanto in theaters and loved that one too. And even the stuff that I didn't see from Disney this year, from what I've heard, be it theatrical films like Cruella or the Jungle Cruise movie, have been doing at least okay for themselves. Or even Disney Plus exclusive content, good stuff like their plethora of documentaries like the Beatles one called Get Back, or particularly bad stuff like the new Home Alone, or that one particular Plus-iversary short featuring The Simpsons just shilling for Disney with some pretty terrible excuses for jokes along the way. There's also the matter that with all the latest releases from Marvel, we're starting to see some Marvel fatigue, at least as far as some would say. Maybe we are, but I think that's one area where we have to let it run its course to see. I figured that if my aunt did want to buy the Disney bundle for me, then one of the biggest benefits would include access to Hulu, which would allow me to check out Season 2 of the Animaniacs reboot. I know a lot of Animaniacs fans were skeptical when they saw the trailer for Season 2, as the majority considered Season 1 to be simply alright, but lacking in a lot of areas that made the original Animaniacs so special. One prominent concern among viewers was the age of the voice actors starting to show. And I suspect that a common attribute shared amongst those who were disappointed with the reboot has to do with the absence of a bunch of beloved characters from the original. And indeed, in the second season, there were only two that we see besides the main three and Pinky and the Brain, who are Dr. Scratch and Sniff and Ralph. Even most of the new characters introduced in the first season of the reboot barely got a chance to appear in the second season. I won't fault anyone for this not sitting well with them. But speaking as somebody who had gotten a lot of enjoyment out of the first season, even while only getting inklings of the original series, I went into Season 2 cautiously optimistic while trying to keep my expectations fairly high to see if it could measure up, if not be on par with the original. And Season 2 certainly delivered on some delightful surprises, including one episode of Pinky and the Brain in which the Brain fully achieves his goal of world domination, if only temporarily, and perhaps my favorite segment of the series, Yakko a Mako, in which Yakko plays with the conventions of cartoon characters interacting with the artist as a direct parody of the Chuck Jones classic Daffy Duck cartoon, Duck-a-Muck. Just with an update in new, modern animation techniques, that segment alone is worth the second season. Not to mention how it successfully finds a way to give a cameo to Pepe Le Pew without certain modern controversies surrounding the character having to come into question. So that was one entry on my list of stuff that I've seen that was a reboot, sequel, spin-off, or something directly based on an established property. To quickly list off others, there was the series finale to DuckTales 2017, one of the best animated reboot shows in recent memory, a perfect way to cap off the series, give closure to all the characters who were introduced and built up to, and ended off the series on just the right amount of a bang. And there was also the Disney Plus series Doug's Dog Days, a Disney Plus spin-off of Pixar's Up that centers on the life of Doug living with Carl Fredricksen after they've returned to the suburbs. It's a very short series with only a few episodes, but ones that were well worth watching, especially if you're a dog lover, and especially they're worth watching to pay respect to the memory of dear Ed Asner and commemorate his passing this year. And then there were two nostalgia-based media that came out right around Halloween. One was The Muppets Haunted Mansion on Disney+, which has been regarded by many as not only the best iteration of Muppets in recent years, but also the best possible iteration of the Haunted Mansion attraction, unless the upcoming remake of the 2003 Haunted Mansion movie somehow manages to take that title. Now, as someone who doesn't watch the Muppets very frequently but still highly respects them and generally enjoys the movies and shows they appear in, I got a kick out of this, and its portrayals of the Haunted Mansion, the jokes, the musical numbers, the effects, and delightful ways all the iconic Muppets filled the roles. The part that resonated with me the most was Gonzo's ultimate conflict, how he could not leave the mansion until he was able to confront his worst fears, none of which came from the mansion's classic spooks or jump scares, which he actually took more delight at than anything else. His fear was more internal, and I think that's something that resonates with all of us, especially as we get older. I know that we all have our fears of one particular creature, person, or object in the world, but we eventually realize that our biggest fears are rooted in our own insecurity and uncertainty of ourselves, and that almost renders our external fears borderline obsolete. The other one that I saw this year at Halloween was Scooby-Doo Straight Out of Nowhere, aka the crossover between Scooby-Doo and Courage the Cowardly Dog, two shows that were both integral to my childhood. One of my primary motivations to checking this one out was to commemorate the passing of Taya White, the voice of Muriel from Courage, with this being her last voice acting role. But in all honesty, it's very appropriate that these two shows can cross over with one another. Scooby-Doo is no stranger to featuring cameos from celebrities or iconic fictional characters. They did it back in the 70s with the Addams Family as well as Batman and Robin, and I remember one episode from when I was a kid in which Johnny Bravo starred in, just to name a few examples. And heck, if Cartoon Network is going to get meta enough to have them regularly interact with more modern Cartoon Network characters in the commercial skits, which they have plenty of times, then it makes just as much sense here. And Scooby-Doo and Courage just seem like the ideal candidate to pair up since they both get easily terrorized and face supernatural forces on a daily basis. Yes, even Scooby-Doo with the bad guys in masks troping subverted since Zombie Island. I thought that the way the Mystery Gang interacted with their new environment and getting to know Muriel was interesting, and the ways that Shaggy and Scooby share with Courage the methods that they have been practicing on how to be less afraid, and the way the mystery and climax unfolded were all very engaging. I still have no idea how to feel about the whole Eustace rap sequence, which, no, I don't apologize for spoiling for anyone who has yet to see the special, because trust me, that's one part that you're way better off knowing what you're getting yourself into to draw your own conclusions of. Whether or not this special can be regarded as great, per se, it's certainly much better entry in the Scooby-Doo saga than Return to Zombie Island, based on what I've heard about that one. And as far as sequels, there's one that I can list off this year that coincidentally is of the horror genre, though it was not released during Halloween. It was A Quiet Place 2. The story was a great way to continue from where the first film left off. The horror elements kept me on the edge of my seat, even had me clutching myself squeamishly during moments where the characters went through the utmost pain that even I don't think I could remain silent through, and the returning cast and crew turned in stellar performances across the board, and great ones from the returning casting crew as well. The best addition was easily the incorporation of sign language, providing a role to a deaf actress. I commend the movie for that greatly. And now on to the mostly new and original content to be released this year that I have seen. There was a lot. More than just the animated features that Disney released in theaters this year. My favorite mainstream non-Pixar Disney animated movie of the year is easily The Mitchells vs. the Machines, a movie that was relegated to Netflix amidst the pandemic, but has gotten a few screenings in theaters across the nation, according to a few of my friends online, whom I envy since it did not come to any big screens near me. Ever since Sony Pictures Animation has gotten the amount of acclaim that it has with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Mitchells is one that a lot of animation fans were eagerly hoping would be another masterpiece. And apart from the art style successfully emulating Spider-Verse's melting pot of computer techniques to give it a unique art style, people were predicting, based on the trailers, that it would be just the kind of commentary on the populace of the modern world being all too consumed by the convenience of our modern devices, the kind that many have discussed should have been the premise and motivation of the Emoji Movie, rather than being a shameless hour-and-a-half phone advertisement disguised as a shameless rip-off of other successful movies. And Mitchell's was that commentary in some ways, but not quite in others. At the center of it all, the message is about the importance of family, delivered through a family road trip, world apocalypse premise that isn't uncommon in family-oriented movies. And that's not a bad thing, as it's a journey packed with a variety of humor that constantly surprises, even after multiple viewings, and characters who cooperate the way that you would expect a dysfunctional family to operate, but certainly in a way that makes you want to follow them through and see them develop and reconnect with one another. The commentary on the audience of cellular technology and mankind's over-reliance on it comes in the form of the world domination subplot, and how the flick of the Wi-Fi switch can throw the whole world into chaos and even make some people eager to be trapped in a small cockpit blasted into the distant void of space forever, as long as it comes with free Wi-Fi. Even more clever than the movie's decision to say that rather than our own technology turning against us because we made it advanced and intelligent enough to think for itself, is that we made it intelligent and advanced and still treated it as a commodity that can be thrown away once it's fulfilled its designated purpose. In layman's terms, we got to the point where we called our cellular devices our friends, and we still only treated them as tools. That's more potent than other attempts from movies I've seen regarding this technology can be your enemy message. The movie even exemplifies this with the defective robots Eric and Deborah Bot, who are accepted and welcomed into the Mitchell family. Not to mention how they provide the movie's best plethora of jokes, especially the one where they react to Monchi the dog, pig, loaf of bread. Ah! For original series to come out of Netflix this year, the biggest topical one was Squid Game, which I have seen the first few episodes of, but I still have yet to see the rest and really get into the hype for it. Of course, the version that I've been getting was the English dubbed version, which I've heard detracted a lot from the series. But aside from that, I am still investing in the series with a plan to eventually watch it the whole way through. To me, though, the biggest appeals for new and original shows were animated ones, and there were two very specific ones that stood out to me in the best way: Kid Cosmic and Maya and the Big Three. One thing that both of these shows have in common is that they're both products of two creative minds behind shows that I grew up with. And though both of them are short series, Kid Cosmic only lasting 2 series and Maya only 1, they are packed with action and hit all the right beats enough to leave the audience feeling wholly satisfied. Kid Cosmic comes to us from the mind of Craig McCracken, best known for Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends and especially the Powerpuff Girls. The art style and even writing of Kid Cosmic, not unlike the Loud House or even the Ducktales reboot, is a shout out to classic comics from the golden age of newspapers. In Kid Cosmic's case, though, it's both action and superhero comics as well as the funnies. It uses an art style that is simple and rendered with minimalist detail, an animation that isn't consistently smooth, but it uses it all to its advantage and makes the best possible use of it. When the story is focusing on the humorous aspects, it keeps the use of animation to just the bare basic essentials, so that nothing gets away of the timing and the jokes land perfectly, but the show pulls out all the stops when it gets to saving the world and traveling through space parts. And it goes all out on the scale of the scenery, the intensity of the action, and everything. As someone who does have his share of passion for newspaper comics, which you may already know as I've mentioned that Calvin and Hobbes is one of my biggest artistic influences, this whole series makes me think of Calvin in his Spaceman Spiff episodes, and I think that as far as art style goes, this is possibly the best way to render a Spaceman Spiff inspired fantasy, especially since Calvin and Hobbes will never get its own animated series. The story and characters are great to follow too, from Kid Cosmic, the hyperactive fanboy who learns how to be a true hero versus a self-proclaimed hero, to Teenage Jo who goes on her own developmental journey as a team leader, one that involves a growing bond with her mother Mo, to Little Rosa who spends most of the series being anything but little, to the wise and humble Grandpa G, to the grumpy old stray cat Tuna Sandwich. When Kid Cosmic finds these 5 rings that give superpowers to whoever wears them, and he assembles his team together, their journey involves learning about the importance of team cooperation, discovering some hidden or extended powers of the rings, discovering 5 additional rings that can grant their own powers to whoever wears them, and finding ways to put said powers to use, like how to use the power of turning into a puddle of goo, and ultimately fighting to prevent all the rings from falling into the hands of other forces who want to claim the rings for themselves, including US governmental forces and intergalactic ones. One of the biggest recurring threats to the heroes, Phantos, is himself just an obsessive fanboy who lives with his mother and does parallel Kid Cosmic as far as his motives to attain the rings of power for just himself. But the ultimate threat the 3 must confront and overcome is Erodius, which, as I think is semi-indicated in its name, is a planet that gets bigger and bigger and more powerful by destroying other worlds and consuming their remains. And of course, at the end, on what is some apparent cliffhanger, we get appearances from characters who are obviously representatives of the Powerpuff Girls because Craig McCracken. If this is where the series ends, then it was a ride that was well worth tuning into, and if another series is to rise out of this one, I'll be eagerly waiting for it. And then there's Maya and the Big Three, which I have been anticipating ever since its announcement that it was being brought to us by Jorge Gutierrez, whom I did mention in my Mr. Enter rebuttal video on El Tigre. As I probably hinted in that video, while I don't exactly worship Jorge or classify him as one of the greatest creative minds of all time, I do still have a lot of respect and even admiration for him, especially as an artist who is keen on delivering works that are very authentic to Mexico, both in art style and in storytelling. I grew up with El Tigre, and I thought it was decent, but I also grew up watching Mucha Lucha, which I thought was better, and later I saw The Book of Life, which a lot of critics have just shrugged off as beautiful looking with hardly any substance beyond basic conventional tropes, but I honestly always thought it deserved more credit than that. So I was eager to see what Jorge could deliver with Maya, and upon watching it as soon as it aired, very appropriately at the start of Mexican Heritage Month I might add, I can confidently say that it might be his greatest creation thus far, even for a series that has only lasted one season. The series does bear a lot of similarities to The Book of Life, including featuring two of its voice actors, Zoe Saldana and Diego Luna, and it starts off with a story with very familiar beats and a cast of characters. The titular one character, Maya, who is the princess expected by her mother to become a democratic ruler, but wants to engage in more physical combat and bask in the glory of being a warrior alongside her three glorified brothers and her crazy father. The conflict involves going to the underworld and confronting the gods of death and hordes of other unworldly creatures, but within the first episode, the familiar tropes complaints quickly dissipate, as the Mesoamerican lore and mythology takes on an entirely different direction. In Maya's journey to search for the three prophesized warriors, she develops not only alliance, but also close relations with these warriors, Rico, Chimmy, and Pichu, all of whom go on their own character arcs and harnessing their own strength, sometimes even recognizing that they initially mistook their strengths as weaknesses. And even Zatz, a perceived enemy to Maya, is revealed to have an entirely different motive that are in Maya's best interest, in fact, and even plays a part in Maya's development. And spoilers, they do end up developing an attraction to one another, but not in a way that feels too forced, in my opinion. The series keeps you engaged with the unfolding of the story and especially the fight sequences, which can get pretty intense and hardcore, especially for a show aimed at kids. I am a firm believer that while it's a matter that must be treaded carefully, children can endure a lot in their entertainment and even appreciate being challenged, if the end rewards suffice. And I do think that the fight, chaos, and monster sequences in Maya do push the envelope just enough without getting too traumatizing for kids, at least on a whole. And that is to say nothing of the ending, which doesn't just opt for an easy happy ending like you'd expect, but rather a light note bittersweet ending that does feel rewarding while not discarding the sacrifices that were made throughout the series. And I commend it for that strongly. If there are any criticisms that I would have towards the series, it would be regarding the visuals. Don't get me wrong, the details and textures and styles are all amazing and are done in a way that do feel truly authentic to Jorge's signature style, but there are moments where all of it seems to overcrowd a specific scene or two. The scenes and use of space definitely look best when there's gold in them, which there seems to be a lot of, as it seems to be the best source to use contrast in an image. And there are a few character designs that I felt looked like they would be a better fit for the Book of Life, where the characters were shown to look like wooden figurines as part of a story's framing device. But that one little thing aside, I have no problem calling this the magnum opus of Jorge Gutierrez's career thus far. Netflix has also provided us with an amazing plethora of documentaries this year. One documentary-style series I watched in the earlier half of the year is called How to Become a Tyrant, which each episode centers on one of the world's most iconic tyrannical rulers and the tactics he has used to become most recognized for using to rise to power. There's another series I saw called History of Swear Words, self-explaining title, hosted by Nicolas Cage. There's a documentary feature called Pray Away, which goes into detail about the oppression and discrimination targeted at gays and lesbians throughout the years, the history of organizations that sought to conform them, some regions of the US where such organizations are still thriving, and how some former members of these organizations look back on their previous mindsets with much regret. And perhaps the most enlightening but also most sobering one to come out this year was Bob Ross, Happy Accidents, Betrayal, and Greed. A documentary that not only celebrates Bob Ross as a man and what a beacon of light he has been to so many others, both as an artist and a human being, but also the darker side of his story that even explained in detail as to why his passing away from cancer went unbeknownst to many people who still believed him to be alive. It's a documentary involving the darker, more sleazy aspects of the business side of art. It's a story that, according to Bob's fellow painters and his son Steve, starts back to when Bob Ross met and had an affair with Annette Kowalski, whom, with the aid of her husband Walt, helped Bob in forming a sustainable business, including manufacturing his paints and brushes, that allowed him to do his painting shows where he connected with his audience while teaching them all his painting techniques, only for the Kowalskis to ultimately reveal that they only saw him as something that could be patented and packaged and slapped onto a lunchbox, and then boom, they're selling it, yada yada. Which led to several failed attempts to coerce him into signing over the rights for his image and his business, and all sorts of unsavory business acts, including lawsuits and screwing over of other artists in the industry, concealing all the tragic details in Bob's personal life, including the fact that he was diagnosed with cancer, in order to preserve his happy and profitable image, and even coercing the Ross family and denying Bob's son Steve, his intended beneficiary of the business royalties and trust funds, even so much as 1 cent of the profits. It's definitely quite disgusting to think that anyone would do this to such a man who was more than just a celebrity image to the general public. But as long as we keep in mind more about him as a person when we take his inspiration, rather than just buying products that have his name on them just for the sake of his name, then I think we're paying more homage to Bob Ross than the Kowalskis or anyone who just wanted to exploit him. One very uplifting documentary I saw that came not from Netflix but was available to rent on Apple TV was Street Gang, which is about the origins of Sesame Street in somewhat similar gains to the Fred Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? It's a wonderful way to remember the origins of the beloved Sesame Street characters we all know and love, but also a great reminder that they are no stranger to backlash from conservative extremists, and that nothing that Ted Cruz can say about their promotion to get vaccinated can deter their image or get them canceled. Now on to musicals. One of the benefits my sister and I both got out of having the Disney Plus bundle is that we got access to the Proshot recording of Hamilton, something that my sister was all too eager to see since it came out last year. But when it comes to musicals of this year, it's been an overall mixed bag. Although I think musical fanatics would rather have a year of mixed musicals than one that was dry and void of them. I have mentioned earlier the Muppets Haunted Mansion that does indeed count as a musical, but as far as original musicals, there were the animated films Arlo the Alligator Boy, there was the new My Little Pony Generation 5 movie, which technically doesn't count as original, both of which serve as pilots for upcoming series, and Vivo, brought to us by Sony, and another entry to add to the legacy of Lin-Manuel Miranda. All of these fell into the category of decent, in my opinion. But when it comes to Lin-Manuel Miranda, he has been taking this year by storm. Apart from the aforementioned Vivo and Encanto, he co-produced the big screen film adaptation of his Broadway show In the Heights. My sister and I both went to see the film for my birthday, and we definitely concurred with the major consensus that it is one of the best film adaptations of a Broadway musical in recent history. Kind of a nice counteract to Dear Evan Hansen, which many have claimed to be one of the worst Broadway musical adaptations in recent history, but not as a campy late-night riff material like the Cats movie, as it has not only proved to be problematic as a choice for adaptation, but also led to many musical theater fans to question whether or not the original musical was even that good in the first place. And on Netflix, Lin-Manuel made his directorial debut with his adaptation of the musical Tick, Tick, Boob, a romanticized musical biopic of Jonathan Larson, which I watched per recommendation of my musical theater friends, and I myself now can't recommend it enough, unless you're just someone who just doesn't like musical or artist journey stories. While Jonathan Larson has become most renowned for producing Broadway's hit Rent, this biopic shows his process in trying to bring to life his musical idea, Suburbia, which is set in a hypothetical future world where people can walk around with their own handheld TV screens and see the rich and famous show off their glamour as they gradually become slaves to technology. Now, I'm sure I'm not the first person to make this joke, but to all the many reviewers, showrunners, and everyone who wrote off this idea as something completely incomprehensible amongst the masses, I would just love to see the looks on their faces now, depending on how many of them are still alive. On a side note, one thing that I was pretty amazed to discover was that the producers of this movie are Brian Grazer and Ron Howard, who just so happen to be both the producer and director of one of my all-time favorite films, Apollo 13. Now, there are already multiple video essays on YouTube praising the hell out of this movie, especially theater fans and all the ways it resonates with them, and artists in general, and I consider myself among those artists who connected with this one on a very personal level, as it reflected a lot of my own personal fears and contemplations that I have openly expressed here on my channel, on my path to becoming an artist. Following Jonathan Larson's journey in aiming to bring to life a musical that didn't even make it off the ground, it involved sleepless nights, creative slumps, falling behind on rent, hardly having a penny in his pocket to spare, a day job that is chaotic, draining, and thankless, all in that order, living space that fall into chaos, relationships with friends and significant others that were lost down the drain. There were even points this year where I felt like I was in the exact same position that Larson was in towards the climax, when he came crawling back to the advertisement company to write jingles. I felt on a number of occasions like if pursuing what that fire inside me really drove me to do was only costing me everything that I loved, That every time I tried to block out the voices that told me it wouldn't amount to anything in the grand scheme, desperate to prove them wrong, if you have to come to that close to destroying your health and well-being just to produce one show routinely, I would end up falling short with nothing to show for it, all while listening to the voices of the masses who say we're pretentious and full of ourselves. As if it almost makes one want to throw away their identity and their dreams just for the sake of being able to make enough just to eat. In addition to which, it's an amazing coincidence that this movie features a character portrayal of Stephen Sondheim, only for it to come out just shortly before Sondheim's passing. Sondheim told Miranda that he loved how gently and royally he was portrayed in the film, even assisted in doing some rewriting of some Sondheim dialogue so that he could feel it truly sounded like him. So glad that he was able to have this to cap off his life and his career while his memory lives on. On a more positive note, to finish off the list of benefits to come out for musical theater fans in 2021, on Apple Plus, we got a Proshot version of one of Broadway's most renowned and acclaimed recent musicals, and the timing of it was very appropriate. On September 11th of this year, 20 years after the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, we got a Proshot recording of the hit Broadway musical Come From Away, which tells the true story of 38 planes with 7,000 passengers evacuated to Gander Airport in Newfoundland, Canada after the 9/11 attack. I was made aware of this one thanks to Diva from Musical Hell, one of my favorite YouTubers, and I've listened to the cast recording multiple times per her recommendation since its release in 2017. But I haven't been able to go see the musical for myself since Broadway has been out of my price range even then, even before the mass shut down, so the Proshot version was a blessing. The show is an overall feel-good one, which at face value sounds disrespectful when it's dealing with a historical tragedy, but the musical makes it work, actually. It knows when to be serious and not shy away from the heavier moments, depicts the lives of multiple distinct individuals who were impacted by the event and even had their families and lives forever changed by it. But since the musical primary theme is about community and coming together in a matter of crisis, something that is still important given what we're currently going through, it shows how these 7,000 people who escaped the tragedy have developed friendships and relationships with Newfoundlanders that have lasted long after the tragedy. As the musical concurs, we honor what was lost, but we also commemorate what we found. Oh, and one last thing I'd like to throw in that is related to the topic of Sondheim. I'll just throw in, though I haven't seen yet for myself, but want to, Steven Spielberg's new take on West Side Story, which has been getting all sorts of acclaim, and is a testament to why I do my best to keep faith in my doubts, and give any upcoming movie or show a chance to defy my expectations with however unnecessary it might seem at face value. Because I myself was skeptical ever since the first announcement that West Side Story was being remade, given how a lot, though not all, of Hollywood landscape has been exhausted with remakes and reboots as of late, and given how the original Robert Wise directed film from 1961 is already so timeless and so borderline perfect as a film musical. But Spielberg apparently found a way to make this version emerge from the shadow of the original and stand as a pinnacle example of a remake that justifies its existence beyond just being an easy sell. It definitely helps reaffirm why I have done my best to give the prospect of remakes or nostalgia-based media a fair shake, even in a time where it's very easy to call it shallow and exploitative. Mind you, I will be honest if I feel that the plethora of remakes or reboots or franchises getting to be a bit much, and even when the end result doesn't pay off, I'm still not going to just act like they, by nature, have no right to exist. So with all that, that's all I have to say as far as the stuff I've seen this year that really jumped out and left an impression on me. Like I said earlier, it's impossible for me to get to absolutely everything, and I look forward to hearing from you what you have seen to come out of this year, and hear your thoughts if you have seen any of my selections, or if you have not but my recommendation has piqued your curiosity. I will be giving you an update on all the things that I've had going the past couple of months that have helped this year go out with a bang for me, and until then, take care.